Generative AI is changing just about everything. It's a profound shift. But like any powerful tool, we have to ask the hard questions. We have to look past the hype. And when we do, what we find are some really serious challenges to fundamental human rights. So in this analysis, that's exactly what we're going to do. Take a systematic look at this new frontier.
Okay, so at the very core of the technical side of this problem is something called AI hallucination. Now, it's really important to get this right. This isn't just a simple bug or mistake, like a calculator getting a sum wrong. No, this is about an AI creating statements that sound completely plausible, totally confident, but are just plain wrong. So that leads us to a really central question, and it's one that's going to guide our whole discussion. Are these hallucinations just, a bug that's going to be fixed in the next software update? Or is this something deeper, something kind of baked into the very nature of the technology itself? As we're about to see, the answer isn't quite so simple. All right, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to tackle this in 4 parts. First, we'll look at the crisis of information. Then, the human cost of AI. After that, we'll dive into the rights of the author. And finally, we'll explore some frameworks for rights-based governance. Okay, let's jump into our first section, the crisis of information. And the key idea here is that we're moving beyond just misinformation. We're talking about something I'd call authoritative deception, where the AI doesn't just get it wrong, it gets it wrong with the confident voice of an expert.
So you might be asking, why does this even happen? Well, research suggests there are 3 big reasons why these hallucinations seem, unavoidable. First, there's a computational limit. It's just formally impossible for these large language models to learn all the ground truths about the world. Second, the data they're trained on is messy. It's the internet, right? It's full of misinformation and biases, and the models just soak that all up. And third, the incentives are a bit off. The whole R&D culture often rewards models for guessing and getting a better score on a test, not necessarily for being 100% truthful. And this is where things get really serious. When you take these AI systems and drop them into critical fields, think law, think medicine, those confident but wrong answers, they stop being just errors. They become what we just called authoritative deception. And the consequences there can be absolutely devastating. Let's look at the legal world, for example. A recent Stanford study, this was just in 2024, found that even the specialized professional-grade AI tools from huge providers like LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters, they were wrong more than 17% of the time. That's the minimum rate. So this isn't some quirky problem with free chatbots. This is happening with the tools that lawyers are actually using. And if we zoom out a bit, this table really shows you the full picture. Look, the general-purpose chatbots like GPT-4, they're hallucinating on legal questions somewhere between 58 and 82% of the time. But even the so-called safer models, the ones built specifically for law, they have error rates that are just alarmingly high. Some are over 17%, one is even over 34%. When you think about it, this is a direct threat to something as fundamental as the right to a fair trial. And it's not just law. The danger in medicine is just as real. There was a study from Mount Sinai where researchers gave chatbots some medical misinformation. And what happened was fascinating and, frankly, terrifying. The AI didn't just spit the misinformation back out. No, it confidently built on it. It started creating these elaborate explanations for medical conditions that don't even exist. This is a clear and present danger to our fundamental right to health. All right, let's shift gears to our second major area, the human cost of AI. This is about pulling back the curtain and looking at the invisible workforce that makes all of this technology possible. You see, the AI supply chain runs on what you might call ghost work, done by millions of people, a lot of them in the global south. And this chart kind of breaks down the different kinds of harm they face. You've got data labelers working for poverty wages. We're talking less than $2 an hour in many cases. Then you have the RLHF safety trainers and content moderators. Their job is to look at the absolute worst of humanity, graphic, toxic content all day long, which leads to just severe psychological trauma. This is a clear violation of the right to fair pay and safe working conditions. And look, this isn't some abstract theoretical harm. Let this sink in. This is a quote from Moffat Okinyi, who used to be a data labeler in Kenya. He was forced to read incredibly graphic content to make AI safer, and he developed these paranoid delusions. It got so bad, his pregnant wife had to leave him. He said simply, "I lost my family." So how does this happen? Well, it's a cycle, and it's a direct result of a process called reinforcement learning with human feedback, or RLHF. It starts with a simple goal. AI labs want to stop their models from saying toxic things. The method? They pay low-wage workers to read thousands and thousands of examples of graphic violence and abuse. But here's the condition. These workers are given hardly any psychological support because the companies are focused on productivity targets. The result is predictable and tragic. Severe, lasting trauma like PTSD and paranoia. It's a system that exports psychological harm. Now for our third section, the rights of the author. Now, you've probably heard a lot about AI and copyright, but I want us to look at this a little differently. This isn't just a legal squabble over intellectual property. It's actually a deep conflict within international human rights law itself. And this is the heart of it, right here in Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It seems to create a paradox when it comes to AI. Part 1 says everyone has the right to share in scientific progress and its benefits. Okay, sounds good. But Part 2 says everyone has the right to the protection of their interests from their own creations. So, see the problem? AI training data puts these two fundamental rights on a direct collision course. So all these huge lawsuits we're seeing, they're essentially trying to solve this human rights dilemma using a legal tool called fair use. But here's the thing, US copyright law is kind of a blunt instrument. It's like trying to perform surgery with a hammer. It's just not designed for the kind of delicate balancing act that human rights law demands. A simple win or lose outcome here would basically wipe out one of these fundamental rights. Okay, so that brings us to our final and maybe most important section. What do we do about all this? It's time to move from just diagnosing the problems to actually building a real structure for accountability. Let's start with the information crisis. The first layer of a solution has two parts, technology and policy. On the tech side, you have standards like C2PA, which can create content credentials. Think of it like a digital watermark. But that's an opt-in system for the good guys. That's why you absolutely have to pair it with policy, with laws that create real legal liability for companies that create and spread harmful AI content. Transparency isn't enough, you need consequences. Now, for the labor crisis, the solution really has to come from two directions at once. You need top-down protections, things like extending international labor standards to cover all these gig workers. But you also need bottom-up organizing, and that's already happening. Workers are forming their own unions and associations to collectively bargain for better pay and, crucially, for mental health support. And for creators, what we really need is a new kind of deal. This table makes it pretty clear. If you just go with a pure fair use model, you enable science, but you extinguish the author's rights. The only framework that works is one based on consent and compensation. That model allows the science to advance, but it also protects both the moral and the material rights of the author. It's the only one that actually balances the equation. So we've talked about these different layers, but they can all be brought together under one single powerful framework. It comes from the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and it's called Human Rights Due Diligence, or HRDD. Now, this isn't some fluffy ethics pledge on a corporate website. This is a legally grounded, proactive, continuous process for companies to actually manage their human rights impacts. And HRD works as a cycle. It's not a one-and-done checklist. First, you have to identify and assess your human rights risks. Second, you integrate those findings and take real action. Third, you have to track your responses to see if they're actually working. And fourth, and this part is so often forgotten, you must provide a way to make things right when harm has already happened. And this really brings us to the core conclusion of our entire analysis. The crisis of information, the crisis in labor, the crisis for creators, these aren't three separate problems. They're all symptoms of one single systemic failure, the failure of AI companies to conduct proper human rights due diligence. This framework isn't just a solution, it is the root solution, because its absence is the root cause of all these harms. So, I want to leave you with one final question to think about. If a new technology's business model seems to require the violation of human rights just to operate, whether it's our right to health, the right to safe work, or the right to own our creative labor, then we have to ask ourselves, can we really call that progress?